You can say that no Gazan has starved at all. The reports by almost every official body say the opposite, but you don't believe them. I've seen lots of images of Palestinians looking hungry. I believe it was deliberate starvation of a people.
I don't think any country in the world has ever been asked to feed the people that are holding its hostage.
British prisoners of war in World War II were fed.
Yeah. But
what's the difference?
What? Meaning what? They have
Meaning what? They want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. They've been expanding settlements left, right, and centre.
They haven't.
Yes, they have. You wouldn't dispute that 20,000 plus children have died, right?
So whose fault is that? I mean,
you don't honestly think that life for a young Palestinian kid in Gaza in the last 2 years has been anything but utter hell. This war didn't start on October the 7th. This is a conflict that's been going on for 7 decades.
When I became Muslim, I wanted to pray, but I didn't know how.
And there were no guided salamats to help me either.
That's why these guided salamats are so powerful.
They teach you how to pray step by step.
For just £10, you can help up to 3 people to learn how to pray.
But for £100,
you can guide by the will of Allah
10 to 30 people connect with Allah every single day. Imagine the reward for every prayer they make.
Every Fajr, every Dhuhr, every Asr, every Maghrib, every Isha.
Every Salah they make is on your scale.
Donate now
and help someone stand in prayer today.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. Piers Morgan seems to be on a roll recently, as he notched up another W for exposing Jewish American propagandist Dave Rubin on his own show by refusing to play along with Rubin's fake Israeli propaganda. Rubin not only denied his beloved Israel starved people to death, he also lied about the Israelis stealing land and building settlements in the West Bank, and showed zero empathy when Piers asked him about the 20,000 plus children in Gaza that have been killed by the IDF. But what else can we expect from a man that buys children from the internet with his husband? The most surprising part for me was how Piers Morgan, aka Mr. October 7th himself, said the conflict did not start on October 7th. Let's watch the first clip.
So first off, you acknowledge that there's been no starvation, correct?
No.
You don't acknowledge
I don't acknowledge that.
Where are the videos and images of the starving Gazans?
Well, I've seen a lot, but you would dismiss them all as fakes. My number one problem with this, you can say there's no starvation. I can say there's starvation. The UN says there was starvation, but you guys don't believe a word the UN says. The other official bodies say there was starvation. You don't want to hear a word they say. Israel denies everything. And in the end, the biggest problem is that Israel will not allow, to this day, international journalists into Gaza to do their jobs. And I keep asking, why is that? Because you and I can...
Well, because they're virtually all activists, not journalists.
No, I don't mean Palestinian journalists. Yeah. I mean international journalists.
No.
I mean, the international...
So where are the videos?
Reuters, let in AP, let in the BBC, let in Sky, let in
it's also
NBC,
a war zone.
Let in
it's
ABC.
A war zone.
Yeah, but they operate in war zones all over the world.
But so when this all ended a few weeks ago, when Trump does this thing, where are all the thousands of starving people? I mean, we're seeing videos of restaurants that are...
Let the journalists in to do their job.
But I mean, right now, where are they? These people have phones.
How do you know?
Live stream. What do you mean?
Do you see where they are?
Of course, there are plenty of videos.
Can't.
What do you mean? There are plenty of videos.
The media are not allowed to do their jobs, Dave.
No.
And I have a big problem as a former editor of a national newspaper.
But the Gazans have phones, and they're showing videos of...
You can say that no Gazan has starved at all. That's entirely your prerogative.
Yeah.
The reports by almost every official body say the opposite, but you don't believe them. However, the best way to get to the truth is let journalists who are used to covering in war zones, let them go in and do their job, particularly now we have the ceasefire. So let them go in. There is a reason the Israeli government is not letting the media in. And I fear I know what it is. They are terrified about what the world will uncover.
I just think that's just...
Well, let them in.
I just think...
There's one way to find out.
A lot of them look fat. They have fresh clothes and fresh haircuts.
I've seen lots of images of Palestinians looking hungry.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't dispute that 20,000 plus children have died, right?
So whose fault is that? You keep saying proportionate. That's the word that has bothered me with this.
I do believe the 3-month blockade earlier this year was a criminal blockade. I believe it was deliberate starvation of a people, deliberately denying them food and aid.
Has any other country in the history of the world been told to feed the people that are killing it?
If you look at the Geneva Convention, actually, but then no other country in the world had the control that Israel has over Gaza, right? Well, which again is a whole separate issue.
Dave Rubin's weak line of questioning, trying to lead Piers Morgan into acknowledging that Israel didn't starve Palestinians, failed miserably because it is an indefensible position to take, especially when the whole world has seen the famine in Gaza as it was unfolding. Morgan even listed off numerous international bodies, including the UN, to back up his claim, and labelled Israel blocking food and aid to Gaza as deliberate and criminal. But like Piers said, no matter how much evidence you cite to shells like Dave Rubin, they will simply deny it, because that's how Israeli propaganda works: deflection, distraction, and denial. A prime example of this was when Piers spoke about international journalists still being banned from entering Gaza, even during a so-called ceasefire. And in response, Dave Rubin deliberately muddied the waters by labelling international journalists as Palestinian activists. And when he was corrected, he used the typical Zionist PR response that reporters are banned from Gaza for their own safety due to it being a war zone. So let me get this straight. There's supposed to be a ceasefire, but it's still a war zone? And as Piers Morgan said, it's common practice that journalists report from war zones. What's crazy is the mainstream media is in the pocket of these Zionists. The fact that Israel still aren't letting them in can only mean that the atrocities they've carried out in Gaza must be so heinous that not even their own media machines could explain them away by putting a spin on them. Rubin even made the excuse that the people in Gaza have smartphones, so there's no need to let the international press in. We know, because that's how the genocide was live streamed for the world to see. Dave Rubin is terrible at doing propaganda. It's not just the pathetic transparent lies, it's also the stuttering and backtracking. And despite Rubin's claims that the Palestinians are well fed and overweight, Piers confirmed that he himself has seen starving Palestinians with his own eyes. Rubin trying to frame Israel as not being responsible for providing aid to Palestinians was yet another propaganda trick, because none of that aid comes from the Israelis whatsoever, and is instead provided by other countries. And Dave Rubin's lack of empathy when Morgan mentioned the killing of tens of thousands of kids in Gaza was simply disgusting. Let's watch the next clip.
I steadfastly supported Israel's right to defend itself, and I still do. However, I kept asking from early on, what would be a proportionate response?
But who has ever been asked to have a proportionate response?
Well, let me ask you.
So they should have murdered 1,000 people and raped women.
Let me throw it back at you. Yeah. In the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, 75 years or so, there has never been a response from either side to an atrocity by the other. There's never been a response anything on this scale. Show me another moment in the 75-year conflict where the response has been to kill 60 times as many people, and where you have hang on, let me finish. Where you have a government with people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir who begin publicly, openly talking about ethnically cleansing all the Palestinians from Gaza, about annexing the West Bank, about taking complete control of all of it, to the point that Donald Trump had to step in and say that is not happening, and credit to him for doing that.
Sure, so but random ministers
they're not random ministers.
About...
They're not typically senior people in the government.
No, but them talking about things is different. I mean,
I hear that a lot. Well, my point is this. You have a unique population in Gaza where half of them are under 18. There is a unique proportion of kids in this part of the world, right? So at what point do you try and find a different way to resolve this? It turned out that Donald Trump found a different way to do it, right? Donald Trump did not agree with Israel continuing to just level Gaza to the floor. He did not agree with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich saying kick all the Palestinians out. Actually, he wants to rebuild Gaza now and make it a prosperous place for Gazans to live, right? But he also wants a two-state solution, which I don't think Netanyahu wants in a million years, right?
Well, so, I don't know that Trump wants a two-state solution.
Well, I think ultimately, if he could achieve it where you can protect the security of Israelis, he would.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way this ever gets resolved.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that. The Palestinians already have a state. It's called Jordan. They have a majority Palestinian population. They're ruled over in a actual apartheid by the Hashemite king. But nobody wants to talk about that.
This is how people in Northern Ireland used to talk, right? Yeah. On both sides, you'd have implacable positions. We can never do peace with these people. They're terrorists. They'd all the loyalists and the IRA called themselves terrorists for 7 decades, right? And eventually, you had new clear thinking by Bill Clinton, by Tony Blair, by Senator Mitchell, and we managed to get to peace that nobody thought was achievable.
Piers Morgan himself admitted that he's not particularly pro-Palestine. In fact, some would say the opposite, and that he is complicit in Israel's genocide due to him acting as a mouthpiece for them early on. But the pro-Israel position that Dave Rubin and his ilk take is now so extreme that even Piers Morgan refuses to justify it. Rubin made the false claim that grapes occurred on October 7th, which there is no actual solid evidence for. He also tried to use Piers Morgan's own proportionate response slogan against him, to which Piers surprisingly responded that in the decades-old history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, there has never been violence on the scale that we've seen committed by Israel over the last 2 years. Piers also called out maniacs in the Israeli government for making public statements about ethnically cleansing Gaza and colonising the West Bank. And Rubin's robotic response was the same as the rest of his fellow grifters, that those particular Israeli government official statements were harmless rhetoric, which Piers correctly dismissed as total BS. Piers Morgan yet again emphasised the vast child population of Gaza to hammer home to Rubin the severity of what Israel has done, which again made no difference deference to Dave Rubin, who just responded with an empty stare like a complete sociopath. I don't, however, agree with Piers Morgan crediting Donald Trump as a peacemaker in this situation, as Trump supplied tons upon tons of weapons to Netanyahu since he became president, and did not intervene until only recently when Gaza was completely destroyed. And as far as Dave Rubin's stupid claim that Palestinians already have a state as in Jordan, the reality is the Palestinians did have a state. It is what is known as Israel, and these so-called Israelis also have a state. It's known as Eastern Europe. Piers Morgan comparing Israel and Palestine to the Ireland conflict was also not accurate, because both sides of that conflict were native Irish. Whereas with Palestine and Israel, the Palestinians are native Arabs, and the Israelis are once again mostly Europeans, with only a minority of them being non-European. Let's roll the next clip.
If I'm an Israeli, or if I'm a Jew living out of Israel around the world, do they feel safer by what's happened, or do they feel less safe? I would argue that the conduct and the way that the Israeli government has waged this war, particularly this year, has actually inflamed hatred of the Israeli government, but also, by association, Israel, Israelis, and Jewish people. I don't think it's made them more secure. I think it's made them less secure. So in all wars, Dave, at some point, you have to have a political solution. The only solution that seemed to be being offered by Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and the others was to raise Gaza to the floor and to expel all Palestinians. So, thankfully, Donald Trump sees it a different way. And I thank God that he does, because this had to end.
I think you're having a disconnect between what Bibi and Trump think. I think they're completely aligned on this.
Netanyahu will annex West Bank tomorrow.
He's been in power for 20-something years. He could have done it at any point. Notice he hasn't. I mean,
come on.
But he hasn't.
But it's like the argument, we haven't dropped an atomic bomb on Gaza, therefore, obviously,
well, if they wanted
fair and love and war, right?
No, but there's a couple things here. I mean, first off, I don't think any country in the world has ever been asked to feed the people that are holding its hostage, right? Like, have you ever called for any other country to do that, or anyone?
Well, okay,
has anyone ever called for that?
Well, British prisoners of war in World War II were fed.
Yeah. But
what's the difference?
What?
Prisoners of war in World War II were fed, so what's the difference?
Because they were holding hostages. They're holding their people. I mean, to me, it seems that you as a British citizen...
people being held hostage in
But you as a British citizen, if French terrorists came in and killed what the equivalent would be many more than 1,200, and they took your wife and killed your daughter, would you be calling for a proportionate response?
No, but then...
Or would you say, whatever you have to do to get my wife back?
You should never ask what somebody who's just lost their family would do in that situation. Obviously, they're going to be speaking from a totally different...
Well, I'm asking you, hypothetically, if they literally took your wife.
Yes, but I don't think it matters what I think is the grieving father or husband of people who've just been slaughtered. Governments should be above that. They have to take a decision which takes everything into account. And the question I come back to is, do you believe that Israel is now a safer or less safe place for Israelis and Jews than it was before?
Way safer.
For every mass terrorist has been killed, they reckon they've been replaced 5 times with people with the same ideology.
Piers Morgan was correct when he said the actions of the Israeli government in Gaza has caused an immense amount of global backlash and resentment towards Israelis, as well as Jewish people around the world. The fact that Rubin denied this and played it off as if the opposite is true shows the depth of denial this reptile is willing to sink to. As Piers said, Netanyahu and his cronies have the sole motive to completely ethnically cleanse Gaza and to totally annex the West Bank. It was hilarious to see Piers Morgan humiliate Dave Rubin, after Dave once again tried to frame the Israelis as feeding the Palestinians by saying no country has fed the people they're engaged in a conflict with, and as Piers said, they have, giving Germany feeding British hostages during World War II as an example. And in response, Dave just stuttered and changed the subject whilst having an anxiety attack. Once again, I reiterate, Israel doesn't feed the Palestinians because the aid comes from other countries. And secondly, Dave, when the country you're defending has worse conduct than the Germans in World War II, maybe that's a clear sign that they're committing evil unlike what's been seen throughout history. Dave Rubin resorted to making a cheap appeal to emotion by asking Piers how he would feel if his wife and daughter were harmed, which was again swatted aside by Morgan because he saw right through it. Maybe Rubin should ask that same question to the tens of thousands of men in Gaza who have lost their families at the hands of the IDF. I'm sure you'd get a much more accurate answer. As Piers said, governments are supposed to make better decisions, something the Israeli regime is incapable of doing since they operate more like an organised crime syndicate. Let's watch the last clip.
The Israeli government, which is a hard-right government, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are not just right-wing, they're absolute far-right headbangers.
But meaning what? Meaning what? They have
meaning what? They want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. Come on, Dave, they do.
They're in the government and they haven't taken an extra inch of the West Bank. They're not.
Well,
no
actually, that's
taking,
not true.
They haven't.
They've been expanding settlements left, right, and centre.
They haven't.
Yes,
Piers,
they have.
Piers, they
you
haven't.
know they have.
Piers, have you been to the West Bank?
You don't think there's been any expansion of settlements on the West Bank?
They build apartments. They build apartments in current places.
Has there been an aggressive expansion of settlements in the West Bank during this war?
An aggressive expansion of settlements
in the West Bank during this war?
No, 100% not.
Dave, there has been. Okay, so here's the problem.
Have you been there?
So here's the problem.
Have you been there? I know people will love that on the internet.
You say none of this has happened. Yeah. You see everything to the prism. There's nothing to see here, Gus.
No.
Israel has done no wrong.
No.
Have they done any wrong?
I don't know how to conduct a war exactly, but I know that if
it's not my question. Has the Israeli government done anything wrong in the way they prosecuted this war?
Not that I know of.
So that's the thing.
So they're desperately trying to.
Okay, so you have a position.
In an existential war, you do what you have to do for your people. Okay. As I think is exactly what you would demand of your government.
Well, except that when my government went to war in Iraq, for example, I led the campaign against it. And I was proven right. I think it's more complicated.
But that's a war across the world where there were no British people being hidden under the ground.
This war didn't start on October the 7th. This is a conflict that's been going on for 7 decades. That's why I compare it, actually, to the war that was conducted between, say, the IRA and the British government.
Well, your government did 75 years ago offer the Palestinians a state for the first time because, as you know, the Palestinians never had a state. It was the British mandate.
I think the whole way it was organized at the start was deeply flawed.
When they say a settlement, that means someone built an apartment over there?
You can sit there and deny all of these things, to which I simply say, let the journalists in, let's find out.
But these people have phones. You know these people have phones, right?
Yes, but I've seen loads of footage which contradicts what you're saying. You wouldn't believe the footage.
What I see are hordes of young men with perfectly cut hair who are in shape with clothes that fit. I mean,
you don't honestly think that life for a young Palestinian kid in Gaza in the last 2 years has been anything but utter hell, do you?
Well, they unfortunately elected Hamas.
It seemed as Dave Rubin's Israeli PR exercise dragged on, even Piers Morgan was losing his patience. As he said, the current Israeli government consists of far-right criminals that carried out a deliberate ethnic cleansing campaign. And for Rubin to pretend as if Israel have stolen no land in the West Bank during the 2-year Gaza genocide is beyond ridiculous, when in reality they accelerated the building of settlements in that time to unprecedented levels, so much so that multiple international bodies and governments publicly reprimanded Israel for their settlement expansion, calling it illegal under international law. I have to give credit to Piers Morgan here for calling Rubin out for being a liar, as there's no excuse for making such blatantly false statements. But when Piers asked him if Israel is responsible for any wrongdoing, this shell just couldn't bring himself to admit they were, and just proceeded to circle back and repeat the same propaganda script he started the podcast with. The fact that Dave Rubin sees nothing wrong with hundreds of thousands of innocent people being killed and cities being reduced to rubble exposes him as being a psychopath. Rubin desperately tried to salvage the situation by pulling the old Israeli propaganda trick, where they refer back to other brutal wars in the past to justify them doing the same in this day and age, which is just demonic. But as Piers said, at least he opposed the Iraq war, unlike Dave Rubin, who is celebrating the fact Israel committed a genocide in Gaza. I think the biggest takeaway from Piers Morgan was that he finally admitted the Israel-Palestine situation did not start on October 7th, after being one of the most stubborn peddlers of that slogan, which is progress, I guess. And he also admitted that Britain should never have given Palestine away in the first place, which I wholeheartedly agree with. This was an absolute disaster of an interview for Dave Rubin, and it was satisfying to see him squirm, albeit in response to an unlikely adversary in the form of Piers Morgan. Thank you for watching. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.